you and take it out from there. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Institute Masterclass in the series, which has been very well attended so far. And thank you for taking the time this morning on, as we said earlier, this cold morning. And at the outset, maybe a spot of housekeeping. So for the avoidance of doubt, and you would have noted it as you're coming into the session, we're recording, and if you have any issues with that, please step off now. But we will be sending out the recording afterwards to registered attendees. So, you know, if you have to step off early or something like that, we will be sending out the slides, which we've been very kindly advised we can share with. So thank you to our speaker this morning for that, Michelle. Equally, from a courtesy point of view, I would ask you maybe to ensure that you have your mute, or your mic rather, on mute. So if you can just everyone check that. Thank you. I'll just for the sake of pig iron, make sure that everyone is muted. Okay. So look, we're delighted to welcome Michelle O'Connor with us this morning. And Michelle is going to take us through the, you know, what is really an important subject in terms of personal development, the whole area of personal governance, and I guess how it can improve, Michelle, how your decision-making process really ultimately, that's where it adds value, and that personal discipline. And I know you're a renowned consultant in your field, and particularly in the area of professional development from a career point of view. And you're going to, you know, thank you for sharing the unique insights that you bring to the table this morning. And you, I suppose, from that table perspective, have insights from both sides of the corporate table. If my memory serves me correctly, you worked with PwC for quite a while in their elite headhunting area, and you're now running your own practice, busy practice. I think indeed you're probably heading off to an international element later on today. So you're busy. So we appreciate your time. So, you know, from your background, you probably have kind of seen over the years all sorts of challenges that professionals face in terms of their career and the blockages in that, and how you kind of navigate around those. And you've dedicated this element of your professional career to helping professionals, I guess, fulfill their potential, if I'm correct. And you've worked. Yeah, I mean, I've seen, you know, you've worked, and we really have, you know, got some great reports back at some of the business leaders you've worked with, and people who've needed to step up to the next level, and then, you know, that tangible increase that we all seek in terms of raising and increasing your income, and you've actually done that on a measurable basis. So, you know, people are really interested in the space. So I guess the other thing to note is that you've actually gone further, and you've created some paradigms in terms of the leadership decision-making canvas and the career decision canvas, which you know, you touch on, I'm guessing, this morning a little bit. Maybe we'll put up a link to your website as well, michelle.ie, which I must give you kudos. That's a great catch in terms of a website name.
I was lucky, Pat. I got it at a time when it happened to be available. So yeah.
Well, it's very memorable, so good for you. You know, you're doing this on a day in, day out basis. You need no introduction, and you're doing a lot of presentations and so on. So what I just want to say is, from an institute point of view, people will be aware that around what we're about and who we are. If you want to join or promote your colleagues to join, please feel free to grab an invitation to do so. We have an open door policy. You can get us at admin@imca.ie, or have a look at the website or the LinkedIn pages and so forth and so on. But ultimately, time is short, the weather is cold, it's not me that you're here to see. So I'm going to hand over to you, Michelle, and maybe you could take the ship of state out. And thank you again in advance for sharing your valuable insights.
No, thank you so much for that lovely welcome, Pat. So at this point, Pat, would you like me just to share my screen?
That'd be just lovely. Thank you,
Perfect.
Michelle.
Okay, let's do that. That all looking good, Pat?
As good as it gets, Michelle.
Perfect, great. Thank you so much for that lovely warm introduction, and good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to jump straight in and share with you an interesting story that hopefully will get you all thinking this morning. Back in September 2015, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, called the EPA, charged Volkswagen with a violation of the Clean Air Act. The agency found that Volkswagen had intentionally rigged 11 million diesel-powered vehicles to cheat government emission tests. Regulators in a number of countries began investigating, and as a result, Volkswagen's stock price fell in value by 1/3. Their group CEO resigned, their head of brand development was suspended, as were the heads of research and development at Audi and Porsche. Now, in April 2017, Volkswagen were ordered to pay a fine of $2.8 billion. And in May, Martin Winterkorn, the group CEO, was charged with fraud and conspiracy. So here's my question. If you had been on the board of Volkswagen at that time, or an employee, would you have allowed those cheats to happen? My name is Michelle O'Connor, and as Pat very kindly introduced me to you all there today, I'm a leadership coach. I have worked in talent acquisition and talent development for more years than I care to remember, but I'm very, very passionate about individuals aligning their career to their values, organizations being very clear on their values, and both coming together to achieve greater success. And I've seen over the years that when people play to their values and are in an organization where they find that alignment, the level of personal success, I was going to say financial success, which Pat mentioned earlier, is absolutely phenomenal. What I'm going to do over the next 45 minutes is I'm going to outline that while in theory you might be thinking, no, I wouldn't, in reality, it actually might have been different. And so today I'm going to talk about the idea of aligning your values and ethics with those of your organization. And what I'll demonstrate is that there are times when it's possible to do so and times when it isn't. And on occasions, that's okay. Because being aware of self-governance and ethics is important as they impact on your success in business and on your career progression and on your ability to make better decisions. So today I'm going to do three things. Firstly, I'm going to get you thinking about your values and to look at them from a different perspective. Secondly, we're going to look at just some of the challenges that you might face as business leaders and also in your career. And thirdly, I'm going to share a mind mapping tool with you that will help you to make better informed decisions. So let's look at values. So our values are formed as our brains develop in early childhood, and are heavily influenced by our caregivers. And different perspectives in childhood will also have a significant impact and influence our values. Now, when it comes to aligning your values with your behavior to achieve career progression, with what's also required in an organization, what role, in fact, do values play? So in my experience, if I was to ask you right now to give me your top 5 values, what would happen is probably this. Some of you would list off a couple of values really quickly, and some of them, would be your true values. And for others, they would be values that you're expected to have, like trust, integrity, family, right? Things like that. And many of you would not be able to give me your top 5 values. And if I told you that I had a deck of cards with 72 values with different values on them, well, where would you start? Okay, so what does that mean for you? That when it comes to making important decisions, if you're not clear about who you are, what you stand for, and what's important to you, it means that when you make decisions, and often we make decisions based on gut instinct, that good instinct might not be guiding you as best it could. So I'm going to invite you to take part in a little exercise, if that's okay. So it's going to be really, really quick. So what I'm going to do in a moment is I'm going to put up on the screen a slide that has just some of the 72 values. And all I would like you to do is simply, based on gut instinct, so really quickly, is to take a couple of minutes and list your top 5. But here's the kicker. I don't want you to use trust, integrity, or family. Okay, those 3 aren't allowed, just for the fun, for this exercise. Now, I know that means that probably at least 75% of you are saying to, well, Michelle, that's 3 of my top values gone out the window, thanks a million, right? But all I ask you to do is have a go. So I'm just going to put them up here on the screen, and I'm just going to give you a little quick minute just to have a look at those and see, are those values that would relate to you? And if so, just jot them down on a sheet of paper. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the time here. I'll just give you a couple of seconds to do that little exercise. And I'm also going to suggest, actually, if there's values that aren't on that list, I'll say these are just a sample, that add those to your list as well. Okay, so I'm just going to give you about another 20 seconds, as I say, to jot down very, very quickly what are your 5 values. As I say, if there's some on that list that resonate, equally if there's others that don't. But I am asking you not to include family or integrity or trust, just for the purposes of this exercise. Okay, so that's your time up, right? So let's put down the pens. So I'm just kind of curious. I don't want to necessarily ready to answer, but just to kind of get you thinking, who identified 5 values? Did anybody? Did anybody identify 4? Did anybody write 3? Was anybody who wasn't trying very hard and didn't even get to 3? So look, I know I'm being a little bit unfair, and certainly by only giving you less than a minute, because normally if I'm working with clients on this topic, it takes at least a couple of hours before people will even settle on their top 5 values. But what it's important to understand is, and I suppose when you talk about your values, equally, you have to be clear, in my view, in terms of the order of importance. Because when we list our top 5 values, we tend to think of them like in a linear way. But if it actually came down to it, there are values that would take precedence over other values. So I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was running a workshop for a corporate client, and I was helping them to identify their core values. And by the end of the session, we had a list of about 10. And I said, okay, right now, put them in order of importance. And one of the team questioned this and asked, why do we have to do that? Is this not enough? And I said, look, let me give you an example. 2 of your values here in the organization are integrity and results driven. But which one is more important? Because if it's results driven, would you do anything to achieve those results? Would you step over colleagues, lie to clients? Would you cheat? Or do you want to look yourself in the eye and know that you've behaved properly, even if that means not always achieving the results you want? That's why it's important to put them in order of importance. And when I work with individuals and organizations, there's often a clash between those 2 values, actually, of integrity and results. And that's because while, particular values are important to you, it doesn't mean that that value has the same order of importance in the organization. And that's the challenge you face, because sometimes you have to make a decision for your organization or your career that on occasions may mean compromising a value that's important to you. And these decisions will impact on your career progression. Now, one of the values that I have is family. And yes, I know I said earlier that you couldn't use it, but I'd never make a decision that would hurt my family. But what if you had to make a decision that meant hurting other families? What if making a decision to close down a plant, for example, hurt hundreds of families? Like, if families is one of your values, how would you handle that? So here's what I believe. Most of these values have different levels within them. And we can make a decision that will affect multiple families because we don't view other people's families as we view our own. And that's okay. I believe that it's these different levels within values that allow us to make decisions within an organization that on occasions might actually appear to compromise our values. And, it allows us to rationalize the decisions we reach. So the decision I make today might affect 100 families, but it might save me hurting 1,000 families in the long run. Honesty, right, is another value at multiple levels. And there are times when we're not completely honest with ourselves. Sometimes that lack of honesty might mean that we give a client so it might mean we don't give a client every bit of information to allow them to make a proper informed decision. Sometimes that lack of honesty means that we're not being totally honest with ourselves. And personally, I find this a very interesting example of different levels of honesty. So we insist on other people being completely honest with us, but sometimes we wear rose-tinted glasses when we're looking at ourselves. And maybe that lack of honesty is what I sometimes accuse my teenage son of, lying by omission when he's not giving me the full story. Many of us would claim honesty is one of our values. But have we at some stage worn those rose-tinted glasses or actually not told the whole story? So before I continue, can I just refer back to my teenage son? And if anybody here in the group has a teenage son and are wondering what career path they should choose, in my opinion, they should consider becoming spies, because if they were ever captured by the enemy, they'd get nothing out of them. Have you ever tried having a conversation with a teenage boy? It's really painful. Where are you off to? I'm going out. What will you be doing? Nothing. Who will you be with? No one. What time will you be home? Dunno. They'd be brilliant at it. Now, the one thing I know is that most of us don't live our values completely all of the time. We can't, and that's okay. But for me, the key is knowing what line not to cross. What level of compromising your value would you not be prepared to go to? For example, that might mean on occasion, you're comfortable lying by omission to your team, but it's not something that you would ever do with your partner. Because when you cross that line, that's when things can go horribly wrong. And when it comes to values and ethics, knowing which ones are important, ranking their order of importance, recognizing their different levels, and knowing where the line is that you won't cross are essential for making better decisions. And also for your organization, and also impacting on your own career progression. Now, as business leaders, business owners, consultants, students, you all work within a system. And that means on occasion, working to the values of the organization, which may be different to yours. So the challenge is not about compromising your values, but rather not compromising them too much. Because it's when the gap between what's important to your organization versus what's important to you is actually too big, that's when problems occur. It's about not crossing that line that shouldn't be crossed. Because when we compromise too much, when we feel the gap is too big, or when we cross that line and we feel pressurized to do so, that's really when we risk making poor decisions. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about today are some of the challenges that you face as business leaders, business consultants, business owners, and students. And you're expected to have all of the answers. You're expected to maintain a confident persona. But you also have your own internal personal conflict as well. And because of the position you hold, or because of your expertise, or because of your experience, there are times when you're expected to have all of the answers. And it means that there are times when everyone wants a piece of you, and yet you can't get any of your work done. Now, this can feel like a very, very pressurized environment. And so my message for you is that it's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay to turn people away from your door. And it's certainly okay to create an environment where people can figure out for themselves what are the answers. And so they don't need to ask you all of the time. Because I like to think of a business leader as a conductor of an orchestra. And what I mean is that you're not expected to be an expert in every part of your business. It's your role and responsibility to hire, develop, and work with the best talent for your organization, and use your leadership skills to bring the best out in them. Create an environment where your team performs with excellence, that together is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, one of the other challenges and things is not just that you're expected to have all of the answers, but that you're expected to portray confidence and look the part all of the time. And that's just not realistic. There are days for whatever reason, your confidence is low, and days that you just don't want to put your shoes on, yet everybody is expecting you to walk the walk. And for what it's worth, I've yet to work with an individual who feels confident all of the time. It's simply not realistic. So one of the things that I do when I work with an individual or a client or a team is to help them to find triggers that they can use to maintain or increase their confidence. So that's what we're going to do now, another little exercise. So what I'd like you to do, if you're open to doing this, is take a page. And what I'd like you to do is fill in 5 words or behaviors that, in your opinion, imply confidence or identify someone as being confident. Now, to give you an example that comes to mind, it could be posture. It could be how somebody communicates. It might be somebody has a proven track record of success. They might have clarity of thought. They could be very knowledgeable. They maybe have a high level of self-belief. They have grit, tenacity, a very long list. But I'd like you just to think about and reflect on, in your opinion, what are those 5 words or behaviors that resonate for you? And looking at that list of 5, what score would you give yourself out of 5 on each of those behaviors? And be honest. No one else is going to see this. So this is just for you, a little exercise. And then for any of those areas where you score less than 5, pick one that you'll commit to today to try and improve. Okay. And to help and support you with that, what could you use as a trigger? So as an example, let's say I wanted to improve my ability public speaking, and I was committing to do that today. I said, okay, I'm going to commit. So to do that, I would need to identify opportunities where I can engage in more public speaking. And then what would be the trigger for that? Well, the trigger might be I might wear a particular piece of jewelry, or I might have a particular pen in my hand, or, I might wear a particular item. But there's something that I will use to help trigger that feeling of confidence when I'm engaging with public speaking. Okay. And just try and give this a go and see how successful it is for you over the coming weeks and months. Now, the other thing, if I can say, is that before I continue on, there is a perception that businessmen and women are different when it comes to confidence. Now, in my experience, that is actually untrue. So I just want to share this openly with you all today, because business women do on occasions doubt themselves, for sure. And I would say they're brave enough to have conversations about it. And businessmen, on the other hand, are not, and they tend to keep it to themselves. And now the irony is that on occasion, women wish they were as confident as men. And the other irony is that when you're doubting yourself, everyone else is looking at you and thinking, I wish I was doing as well as they are in their role or in their business. So we look at things from our perspective and we see what's wrong. Whereas other people look at us from their perspective and see what's right. And I think it's a really important thing to kind of change our perceptions. And that means thinking differently. So again, we're just going to do a very little exercise together, if that's okay with everybody. So I'm going to show you an image on the screen in a moment. And what I'd like you to do is write down the first word that comes to mind when you see this image. And then I'll tell you what to do next. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is write down the very first word that comes to mind when you see this image or this person. Okay, so next what I invite you to do is list 3 of Donald Trump's qualities. Now, whether you like him or you agree with his politics, it's irrelevant. He has many qualities, okay? I'd like you to take a moment to write down 3 of his qualities. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to do that now. I'm just going to keep the time on my phone. Okay, I'm just going to give you another 10 seconds. So what 3 qualities come to mind that you can think of? As I say, whether you agree or disagree with his policies is irrelevant because he's many qualities. 3 qualities that come to mind when you think of Donald Trump.
Will we pop them in the chat box, Michelle?
Actually, people can do. Actually, that's a lovely idea, Pat. Yeah. Because certainly, you know, when I think of Donald Trump, if I can share with you, I think he is driven. He is tenacious. He fights for the underdog. He can be charming. There's 4 straight away that have come to mind. Let's have a quick look, Pat, and see if I can see what's in the chat there. Okay, self-belief. He has a voice. Yes, absolutely. The voice of a big group of America. Love that, Ailish. Yeah. Speaks his mind, not afraid. Absolutely. Self-assured. Yeah, fantastic. Anything else there? Yeah. So it's an interesting exercise there, I think, in terms of, you know, questioning and thinking about, you know, our perception of others. Because it mightn't have been easy to do that exercise, and it mightn't actually have been comfortable either. But the challenge really isn't about finding qualities for Donald Trump. But that's not the issue here. Really, it's about being comfortable with this new perspective, right? And that says more about you and I than it does about him. Because we need to be open to thinking differently. Because if we're set in our ways or our opinions, right, it can cause conflict. And that's just the same as if we hold our values too rigidly. That too can cause challenges. Now, one of the other challenges, the third challenge that I want to talk with you about today is from an internal personal perspective. And what I mean by this is that there are times when you take on a particular role because you want to work at a level. And it can often turn out that that role isn't quite how you expected it to be. Okay, so you have a choice. You either put your head down, do nothing, and this can lead to huge problems going forward. Number 2, you could decide to leave the organization that you're in. Or number 3, there's a third option, okay? And that's often overlooked. And the third option is staying in the organization, but taking on a different role. Now, I regularly work with clients who love the organization they work with, but have kind of fallen out of love with the role that they have. And to give you an example, last year, I worked with a country lead for a global pharmaceutical company. And there were some challenges and changes taking place, and he wasn't quite sure where he was going to fit in the new structure. Okay, so he was considering leaving. And when we talked it out, we realized the real problem was that his current role wasn't challenging him enough. So here's what we did. We worked out what he loved to do, what he cared about, what was important to him, and how he could have a greater impact on the strategic vision of the organization. Now, the result of this, that he was actually able to go back to the senior management in the US of this organization and put a proposal to them that allowed him to step away from his role as country lead and to take on a more global position within the organization. Now, 2 things came from this. Firstly, he ended up with an ideal role for him, but also a significant rise in his remuneration. Secondly, the organization got to retain a really valuable asset. And I suppose at a time when staff retention is crucial for most organizations, this was a win-win for both parties. So, ladies and gentlemen, your values impact how you make decisions, as do the challenges you face on a day-to-day basis and how you react to them. And while you're expected to have all of the answers, it's okay when you don't. And while you're expected to have, ooze confidence, it's okay when doubt creeps in. And on those occasions when you've fallen out of love with your role, changing your perspective and thinking differently about your options will help you to make better decisions for your business and for your career. So next, I'd like to share with you a mind mapping tool for decision making. And I suppose the question is this: how can you take the challenges that you face and make them a little bit easier starting today? So what I'm going to share with you is a mind mapping tool for leadership decision making. And it's created in the form of a canvas, and this will be available to everybody if they want to. Pat will share it with the group later or over the weekend or early next week, if anybody's interested in getting access to it. But it's created in the form of a canvas with 3 sections to complete, which will help you capture the factors that influence your decision making, whether that's in your personal life, in your business, in your career. Because when we're making decisions, we're influenced by our knowledge in 3 categories. Okay, our internal knowledge, external knowledge, and then I frame it as personal. And here's an example of the canvas here for you to have a quick look at. And we consider the range of potential factors within each category. So you can see there's internal, external, and personal factors. and we consider the range of potential factors within each category, what we know, what we don't know, and this tool is going to help us to do just that. So you'll see there within internal factors, and it's a bit light on the screen, mission, values, financial, people, productivity. See internal factors in an organization, external, regulatory, legal, brand, environment, competition. And then personal factors to us as individuals, stuff like needs, emotions, values, beliefs, and so on. Okay. So during the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through a decision that was faced by a recent client. And I want you to just even reflect on this, or to write down, if you like, the factors that in your opinion or experience would impact on you making the same decision. So the problem was this. As a newly appointed CEO, my client wanted to make changes to his leadership team, and he wanted to fire the VP of operations. He wasn't impressed with this person's performance in the first few months, and he wanted him gone. So if you could put yourself in the situation of the CEO for a moment, new into a role, new into an organization, senior member of your team isn't performing, and your immediate thing is, I want that person gone. I want them out of here. What internal business factors, in your opinion, should be considered? What external business factors, in your opinion, should be considered? And then finally, what internal personal factors, those ones along the bottom, should be considered? I'm just giving you a moment to reflect on that and just think about that. And again, if anybody would like to share some thoughts and pop it in the chat, that would be great. And we'll discuss it then in a moment. So just to make it easier for you to read there, the internal business factors. So for example, the business's mission, company values, what might be the financial implications of this decision? How might it impact on the people within the business? How might this decision impact on maybe the team, the productivity of the business, output? And then just for you to have a look at the external business factors, just a little bit easier to see there in the darker print. Regulatory, there's some regulatory factors in the market that might impact on that decision to fire the VP of operations. What are the legal implications? Brand, how might this impact on the reputation of the brand or the organization? This person was fired. Competition, how might it impact on your competition in the market? How might it be perceived? Could it be an advantage to the competition, disadvantage? And then as a CEO making that decision, that's those internal personal factors. So your own set of values, how might they play out in influencing your decision regarding firing a member of the team? Your emotions at the time affect how we make decisions. Our beliefs, our needs. An interesting one. What are your needs? What's the CEO's needs at the time that might influence that decision? And then your own ethics. How might that influence your decision? Just going to pop into the chat and see if there's any comments. Yeah, client relationships, that's a great one, Pat. Absolutely. Time spent, corporate knowledge, absolutely. Impact on that. Yeah. Cost of the compensation package. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of obvious costs, a lot of intangible, unknown costs as well. To share with you in that example, so I'm just going to back there. Which was that done? The other thing to obviously think about in there is, do you know enough about the topic to make a decision? And also, are you prepared to take responsibility for the consequences of this decision? And in this example with this particular CEO, I'm not going to get into the detail of it because this is really more an exercise for yourself to reflect on, oh, there's a lot to consider making a decision. So you can even imagine if you're making decisions around your career, which impact on your livelihood and your income and your status and your sense of fulfillment, there's lots of decisions that have to be considered, whether you're looking at your career progression and so on. But interesting, what came up in this particular example with this particular client was that he was in quite a heightened emotional state at the time due to circumstances that were actually in his personal life. And he was completely unaware that he was bringing those, which we all do, to work, which we all do, and that actually was skewing and affecting his perception of what was happening. And actually, the VP's behavior was triggering emotions with him. But it wasn't the VP, it was actually emotions that were bubbling up from what was happening in his personal life. So again, it was just an interesting example when he played this out and mapped it out, that he was actually able to come to a better decision for him, for his team, and for the business. And as I say, it's irrelevant of whether the person was fired or not, but the point is he made a decision. He took responsibility for that decision, and things worked out really, really well in the long term. Okay, just move on. So when Pat reached out to me today, sorry, I should say a number of weeks ago, to come and talk to the group, I was asked to discuss this idea that, as business leaders, owners, consultants, students, that self-governance and ethics are important. And that you have your values, knowing them is important in terms of career progression and success. And at times they will be different to the values of the organization, and that's okay. But recognizing that your responsibility is only to make the best decisions possible will make it easier when your values don't fully align. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up towards the end of our time. I've another couple of minutes, but I just wanted to finish off on one final story, if I may, and share this with you. So a few years ago, Hewlett-Packard here in Dublin made the decision to close down its print business in Kildare, with the resulting loss of about 200 employees. And the CEO knew that he had to let these people go, but he was very, very conscious of the impact it would have on them and their families and on their careers. He also knew that he didn't have all the answers So he put together a team that built a year-long program designed to give his people the skills and support they needed for what lay ahead. Now, he fought tooth and nail to make sure that his people would have the very best chance of finding their next job as quickly as possible. Now, it would have been very easy for him to implement the organization's decision and do the bare minimum for his staff. But one of his key values is respect for his people. Now, in my opinion, by fighting tooth and nail to provide the right support, he was trying to align the decision of the organization as closely as possible with his own values. Now, today, all of the people who wanted work and have found new jobs, and they all speak incredibly highly of him and his team. So, ladies and gentlemen, it won't always be possible to fully align your values with those of your organization. But when you can align them as closely as possible, that's when best decisions are made. That's when businesses achieve success and you can enjoy greater career progression. And I really wish you every success and good luck with that. Thank you so much for listening. And if anybody has any questions, you can obviously connect with me on LinkedIn, and there's my contact details if anybody wants to get in touch separately or privately. Over to you, Pat.
Thank you. That was lovely, and I must say very insightful. It's the moral conundrum. There's an old analogy that the loneliest position is at the top. It's the chain of command is pyramidal, so it can be very cold and lonely at the very top because you are expected, as you say, to have all the answers, and kind of have them at the tip of your fingers when the crisis comes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Ethically,
and also as business, mindful of the group here today, business owners, as consultants, a lot of individuals working on their own, they're leaders in their own way. Sometimes we think of the perception of a leader as somebody who's running this massive, big, multi-billion organization. But I believe we're all leaders. We're all leaders. We all need to demonstrate leadership capabilities. And as a result, we're all tasked at many times with challenging decisions that we have to make. And,
on the day that's in it, Michelle, we're in a unique conundrum of ethics and governance as we look at the Ukraine situation and the ethical dilemmas that are being presented to the government, for example, and how we go about our engagement with, our primary solid fuel supplier in terms of gas, and the impact that will have on the very lives and the fabric of society, and indeed the viability of a lot of businesses because of the price of energy. So those ethical questions relative to people's values are becoming very much front and center just at this particular moment. So maybe, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I could pose a question to you kind of from, that particular one that often comes up in terms of top teams and so on. So you have a new CEO coming in, they're looking to build their own team, and they're juggling that conundrum in terms of the present value of the team that's in place relative to the added value that new hot hires may bring. And the one that often struck me, and as I put it up there, was when it comes to the crunch, fine, cost is cost, and you deal with that at the inflection point, just bite the bullet and get on. But it's that relationship piece, which is the intangible, the unknown kind of iceberg element. What is the value of the relationship with the clients out there, and from your reputational damage point of view, how will that be perceived in the market if the person has unique kind of reputational points, and how do you I suppose align a set of values that you may have that you're bringing into the organization relative to the values that they're operating on that are existing. So you're a new CEO that's come in, there is an existing set of values in the organization that template's in place and may have been built up over 3, 5, whatever the strategic plan is. That's the way we do things around here. And you're coming in with a new broom. They may not be aware of your values. How do you get that translation? How do you kind of, I suppose, bring the crowd with you? That it isn't seen kind of as a hammer dropping.
Brilliant question, Pat. I would actually nearly come back a couple of steps from that. Yeah. So before that individual even join, and this is actually relevant for anybody at any level, I would say, maybe not just a CEO, but before you even join that organization, is having that conversation at interview stage. What does the organization stand for? What's important? What do you care about? How do you treat people? How do you treat your clients? You'll often get a good indication even through a recruitment process how you're being treated. in terms of this is like, for example, are they very fast to give me information? Are they fast to follow up? Are they respectful of my time, and therefore they interview all the interviews in half a day, so I'm not in and out for interviews? It's amazing how little things we can kind of pick up in the process. But then when you're in situ, I agree with you. The strategic plan and vision has been probably mapped out before you got there, right? It has been mapped out before you got there. There's a culture that you're already entering into. So I think it comes back to that piece around finding alignment on what you can. It's not going to be 100%. We're all unique, so that's not going to happen. But it's finding enough alignment, that you believe. You've got to believe in the mission of the company and what it is they're trying to do, or even if it is that they're trying to change something, and you're being brought in as a person who's going to change that. So that's a different role. So again, it probably depends on your remit coming in as a CEO. Is it, let's get to the next level, keep it a steady state? Is it actually, we're in dire straits here, we need a massive transformation? So it actually will probably impact and affect the role you're coming in to deliver. And then I think, again, it's about making sure that you're informed in terms of the decisions you make within that role, in terms of the people you keep, you retain. And again, those relationships you mentioned there, having the time and making the time to get to know the people in your team, get to know your stakeholders, and understand, listen, so important. Listen to what people have to say. So many people, I think, in organizations feel they don't have a voice, they're not heard anymore. So it's amazingly powerful when people feel listened to, and then gather that information. And then as a CEO, again, comes back to, I'm informed, I have as much information as I can. I'm looking at those internal, external factors. I'm mindful of what's important to me and my how I want to be as a leader, and then making those right decisions. And then that's why you get paid the big bucks as a CEO, is you're taking responsibility for that decision.
Yeah, and we're seeing a paradigm shift occurring at the moment, Michelle, where it was driven on quarterly earnings to a large degree, which in fairness probably wasn't beholden to the best ethical practices, because it was driven by the almighty dollar and hitting that sweet spot. But we are moving towards a more, from the ESG point of view, I suppose, the long-term kind of impact in terms of how businesses are run in terms of ethics and governance. And we saw our own current president, Michael D. Higgins, kind of coming to the Oris with, on a platform of ethics, and that was the whole kind of principled basis of leadership that he was espousing at the time and still is. So, I mean, when we look out at the marketplace, for example, if we look at PwC as a case in point, and you read some of the reports, they would say maybe 70% of mergers and acquisitions probably fail as a consequence of poor fit in terms of that whole area of culture, that big nebulous area of culture. In terms of the I suppose the inflection point between culture and ethics, okay, how do you translate one culture, your ethics, into kind of a culture you're merging into?
Well, coming back to the point of, ethics and kind of morals is an interesting topic in its own right, in terms of, what might define your ethics could very be different to what I feel is ethically right or correct. So it's not a given, because it's not binary, it is or it isn't. It's lots of gray in between all of that. And I think in terms of culture, what's culture in an organization? Like, I suppose, what's an organization? It's just made up of lots of people. It's made up of lots of people, with their customers, the people who work in that organization, who have different ethics, different belief systems, different values. And I think if we look at an organization as that amazingly powerful mishmash of different people who have different beliefs, you've got to, those organizations have got to have a common purpose. Like, what are they working towards? So that, I always use the analogy of a rugby line out. Everyone on that line out looks different. Tall, short, fat, skinny, everyone has a place on that line out. But actually, when they're working in unison and they're marching to the same line, right, in that line out, for a common vision, common mission, common purpose, you can't break that line. You can't break that line. And so I think it's about I think for me, Pat, if I can share with you, it's very much all of this is based on respect.
Okay.
All based on respect. Respecting each other's differences. Respecting that you're tall, I'm small, respecting you're thin, I'm fat, or whatever. It doesn't matter. But respecting our skills, respecting our views of the world, respecting our heritage, and coming together and working together in a way where we are all trying to achieve a common goal, hopefully for good,
Sure.
but that can equally work, you know, if that goal unfortunately is for ill or for evil. But again, that's a perception.
Yeah,
you know,
where you're coming from. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, somebody might perceive the war, and again, this is an example because you mentioned it, might perceive what's happening in Russia as shocking. Somebody else might have a completely different perspective because of the information that they have, because of their beliefs, because of their lived experience. We don't know. We're all different. But I think it's important we listen to each other. We respect each other. And coming back to, and we respect each other's values, you know, because that does inform how ethically we behave. But it's not to underestimate the challenge in that. Because as I gave some examples there in our talk this morning, you know, they're real people. They're dads, they're brothers, they're sons. They're, you know, the people who make those decisions in Volkswagen, for example, they're people. And had a massive impact on their career and on the business and on the shareholders. And again, you know, so it's not to underestimate, as I say, we are all tasked with very challenging decisions at times.
And sometimes kind of through the prism of the rear view mirror, decisions that are made in good faith at a particular moment in time can be judged on a different set of circumstances. You know, absolutely. Correct. So I'm minded of the audience that we have and the time that you've given us, and I'm also minded, you know, ethically in kind of that whole area, that bit of advice that's populating around the place. You know, dance as if no one's looking, but text and WhatsApp as if you're going to be in the High Court in the following week. Yeah. So on that basis, we will be sending out the information to you afterwards. We've recorded this session. Michelle has been kind enough to give us her slide deck as well. We'll be sending that out. We put up a note to the Eventbrite module that we're having up next, our masterclass on diversity and inclusion, which is consistent with the theme that Michelle has started this morning, I guess. And two of our colleagues will be doing that, and that's going to be very good. We're looking forward to that. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing what was a really insightful session. I suppose, you know, it's important to talk about these things. I often reflect that maybe one of the great skills that is in short supply, but maybe, you know, would be kind of more valuable as we get more mature in our careers, is that ability to aggressively listen a lot more. And I think to that end, I think a lot of people were listening to what you said this morning. So Gurmila Mahagat, Slán go fóill, safe travel. I know you're jetting off, and it's great to be off.
Thank you, Pat.
And back into the physical world again. So travel safely.
My first flight in 2 years. I'm terrified and excited at the same time.
Well, there you go. That's a good emotional maelstrom to be facing into on a Thursday afternoon. Exactly. Listen, thank you very much, everybody. We said we'd have you off in good order, and as we are, Gurmila Mahagat, Slán go fóill, and hopefully we'll see you on the next module on the 3rd of March.
Great.
Thanks,
everybody. Thanks, Michelle. Have a great day. Thanks, Pat.
Bye.
Bye now.